January 30th, 1661. London, England. Thousands gather at Tyburn for what appears to be an ordinary execution. But the figures on the gallows aren't breathing. They haven't been alive for over 2 years. This is the story of a king's revenge that transcended death itself. Charles II, known to history as the Merry Monarch, orchestrated one of the most unusual punishments in royal history, the posthumous execution of Oliver Cromwell. What drove a king to dig up his enemy's corpse? Why wasn't death enough? And how did this macabre spectacle change the very nature of royal justice? January 30th, 1649. Whitehall Palace. A 19-year-old prince stands frozen as the executioner's axe falls on his father's neck. King Charles I dead. The crowd roars. The monarchy was abolished. That young prince was Charles Stuart, heir to nothing. In that moment, watching his father's severed head held high before thousands of cheering subjects, something fundamental broke inside the future king. The image would burn in his mind for 11 years. Every face in that crowd, every cheer, every moment of his father's final degradation. Oliver Cromwell, who had orchestrated this regicide, now ruled England as Lord Protector. The Commonwealth had been born in royal blood, and Cromwell was its architect. Charles fled England that night, becoming Europe's most unwanted refugee. Court after court turned him away. Kings feared association with the son of an executed monarch. He slept in barns, begged for scraps, and wore the same clothes for months. But exile taught Charles patience. While Cromwell transformed England into a Puritan police state, Charles learned to wait. He studied his enemies. He memorized their names. He catalogued their crimes against his family, against God, against the natural order. In the cold castles of France and Holland, Charles planned. Not just restoration, that was inevitable. He planned something far more comprehensive. A reckoning that would reach beyond the grave itself. Because for Charles Stuart, death would not be enough. If you're as disturbed by this royal revenge story as I am, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to reach our first 1,000 subscribers to bring you more shocking historical truths that textbooks won't dare tell. Your subscription literally helps expose these buried stories. May 29th, 1660. London erupts in celebration. Church bells ring across the city. Wine flows freely in the streets. Charles Stuart returns home, no longer a refugee prince, but King Charles II of England. The crowds that once cheered his father's execution now throw flowers at his feet. Banners proclaim the glorious restoration. Children born under Cromwell's Commonwealth see their first king. England rejoices. Charles waves from his carriage, smiling. The merry monarch has returned. But behind that practiced royal smile, the 19-year-old boy who watched his father die still remembers every face in that execution crowd. Within hours of his coronation, Charles issued his first royal decree. Not about trade, not about foreign policy. About justice. The hunt for his father's killers begins immediately. One by one, the regicides are dragged from hiding. Thomas Harrison hanged, drawn, and quartered. John Cook disemboweled while still breathing. 10 men who signed Charles I's death warrant pay the ultimate price. Their screams echo through London as crowds cheer the king's vengeance. But Charles counts the names. 59 men signed that death warrant. Many have fled to America. Others died of natural causes during the Commonwealth. And then there's Oliver Cromwell, the architect of it all. The man who turned England against its king. The man who destroyed the divine right of monarchy itself. Cromwell died in his bed in 1658. Peaceful, honored, given a state funeral in Westminster Abbey, the same abbey where kings are crowned and buried. His tomb bears the inscription, "A faithful servant of God and country." Charles stands before that tomb, reading those words. His greatest enemy lies 6 feet below, beyond earthly punishment, beyond royal justice, protected by death itself. The king's advisors suggest symbolic gestures. Destroy the tomb. Strike his name from the records. Typical royal revenge against the deceased. But Charles has spent 11 years in exile perfecting his hatred. Symbolic gestures won't satisfy the boy who watched his father's head roll. If Oliver Cromwell thinks death will save him from answering for his crimes, he's about to discover that kings have power over both the living and the dead. What Charles plans next will shock even his own court, because some betrayals demand punishment that transcends the grave. January 29, 1661. Midnight approaches. Westminster Abbey stands silent under a moonless sky. Inside the ancient walls, where kings have been crowned for centuries, something unprecedented is about to unfold. Charles has chosen this date carefully. Tomorrow marks exactly 12 years since his father's execution. 12 years of waiting. 12 years of planning. Tonight, the dead will finally answer for their crimes. A small group of men approaches the abbey. They carry no torches, darkness is their ally. These aren't grave robbers or body snatchers. They carry royal orders sealed with the king's own hand. The target, Oliver Cromwell's tomb. But Cromwell won't be alone in his final journey. Henry Ireton, Cromwell's son-in-law and fellow regicide. John Bradshaw, the judge who sentenced Charles I to death. 3 architects of royal murder, about to face royal justice. The shovels break ground. 2.5 years of English earth must be moved. 2.5 years of decay await below. The diggers work in shifts, fighting waves of nausea as the smell rises from the disturbed graves. By dawn, 3 coffins emerge from their resting places. What's left inside barely resembles human remains. Cromwell's once mighty frame, reduced to bone and putrefied flesh. Ireton's corpse partially mummified. Bradshaw's remains, already skeletal. But for Charles II, this isn't desecration. This is justice delayed, not denied. The corpses are loaded onto carts, covered in heavy cloth. London sleeps as this ghastly convoy moves through empty streets toward Tyburn. The same route Charles I took to his execution now carries his executioners to theirs. At Tyburn, carpenters work by torchlight. 3 gallows rise against the night sky. By morning, London will witness something never before attempted in English history. The execution of men already 2 years dead. The corpses are dressed in their burial shrouds, their decay barely contained by rotting fabric. Ropes are fitted around necks that can no longer feel. Arms that once signed death warrants now hang limp and lifeless. As dawn breaks on January 30th, exactly 12 years after Charles I lost his head, Charles II prepares to show England that royal vengeance knows no boundaries. Not even death itself can protect the enemies of the crown. The crowds are already gathering. Word spreads quickly through London streets. Come to Tyburn. Come see the impossible. Come witness the king's justice reach beyond the grave itself. Dawn breaks on January 30th, 1661. Tyburn is already packed with thousands of spectators. Word has spread through London like wildfire. The king is executing dead men. Nothing like this has ever been attempted in English history. The crowd doesn't know whether to cheer or recoil. Some see justice for the murder of a king. Others witness something that defies every law of God and nature. The 3 corpses are hoisted up the gallows simultaneously. Cromwell in the center, the position of dishonor reserved for the worst criminals. Ireton to his right, Bradshaw to his left. The ropes creak under the weight of decomposing flesh. A collective gasp rises from the crowd as the bodies swing. Children point in fascination and terror. Women cover their faces, then peek through their fingers. Men who fought in the Civil War on both sides stand transfixed by this impossible sight. The executioner reads the charges aloud. High treason, regicide, murder of the Lord's anointed king. The corpses cannot answer. They cannot plead. They cannot beg for mercy. They simply hang, swaying in the January wind like grotesque marionettes. Hours pass. The crowd swells to nearly 10,000. Vendors sell bread and ale to spectators who've made this a holiday. Street performers work the edges of the mob. This isn't just an execution. It's become London's most macabre entertainment. Some in the crowd remember Cromwell alive. They recall his victories, his iron discipline, his transformation of England. Now he dangles like a common criminal, his legendary authority reduced to rotting flesh and bone. Others remember Charles I's execution on this very anniversary. They see poetic justice in this reversal. The regicides who cheered a king's death now provide the spectacle themselves. But many are simply horrified. Mothers hurry their children away from the sight. Priests mutter prayers, unsure whether they're witnessing divine justice or unholy desecration. Even hardened soldiers who've seen battlefield carnage find this display unsettling. As the day progresses, Charles's revenge reveals its true calculated cruelty. This isn't merely about justice, it's about complete humiliation. The king has ordered specific indignities that go beyond simple execution. The corpses are left exposed to the elements and the crowd's fury. Spectators throw rotten vegetables, stones, and refuse at the hanging bodies. What began as royal justice transforms into a mob's feeding frenzy. Cromwell's corpse, once the body of England's most powerful man, becomes the primary target. The crowd's rage focuses on the architect of the Commonwealth. They curse his name, spit at his remains, and treat his corpse like a piñata of hatred. The symbolism is unmistakable. Charles II isn't just punishing traitors. He's demonstrating that royal power extends beyond the grave. Death provides no sanctuary from a king's wrath. Even the afterlife cannot protect those who dare challenge the divine right of monarchy. The spectacle continues from dawn until sunset. 12 hours of public degradation. 12 hours of royal vengeance on display. The message to any future rebels is crystal clear. Cross the crown, and not even death will save you. As darkness approaches, the crowd begins to thin. Many have seen enough. Others linger, mesmerized by this unprecedented display of posthumous punishment. The three corpses continue their ghastly dance in the evening wind. This level of historical detail doesn't exist in mainstream content because it's too shocking. That's exactly why Throne of Lies needs your support. Subscribe now. Each subscription helps us dig deeper into history's most disturbing truths. But Charles II isn't finished. The day's humiliation is merely the prelude to an even greater desecration. As night falls on this anniversary of his father's murder, the king prepares to deliver the final insult to his enemies. What happens next will ensure that Oliver Cromwell's name becomes synonymous with ultimate disgrace for centuries to come. What transforms a 19-year-old prince into a king capable of such extreme posthumous vengeance? The answer lies in trauma that reshapes the very foundations of royal psychology. Charles II witnessed his father's execution at the most formative moment of his life. Psychologists today recognize this as a defining trauma. Watching a parent's violent death creates lasting psychological scarring. For Charles, this wasn't just personal loss. It was the destruction of everything he believed about divine kingship, royal authority, and the natural order. 11 years of exile compounded this trauma. Charles went from heir to the throne to Europe's most unwanted refugee overnight. He begged for scraps, slept in barns, and wore the same clothes for months. Every humiliation burned deeper into his psyche. This posthumous execution reveals classic symptoms of what modern psychology calls a complex trauma response. The need for complete control. The inability to let grievances rest. The compulsion to inflict maximum humiliation on those who caused the original wound. But Charles's revenge goes beyond personal psychology. It represents something far more calculated, the deliberate use of degradation as political theater. Every aspect of the spectacle was designed to send a message about royal power that transcends death itself. Throughout history, rulers have used posthumous punishment as ultimate psychological warfare. Roman emperors ordered damnatio memoriae, erasing enemies from all records. Medieval kings displayed traitors' heads on spikes for decades. But Charles II's necrophilic revenge represents something unprecedented in its calculated cruelty. Even in an age accustomed to public executions and brutal punishments, this spectacle shocked London society to its core. Court records show that many nobles privately expressed disgust at the king's actions. Church leaders struggled to reconcile Christian burial traditions with royal vengeance. The common people were equally divided. Some saw divine justice, the regicides finally paying for their ultimate crime. Others witnessed something that violated fundamental human dignity, even in death. But the political impact was exactly what Charles intended. Future rebels now understood that royal wrath knew no boundaries. Death provided no escape from monarchical justice. The crown's memory was longer than human life itself. This event established a new precedent for royal vindictiveness that would echo through British history. It demonstrated that absolute monarchy meant absolute power over the living, the dead, and everything in between. The message was unmistakable. Challenge the divine right of kings, and face consequences that extend beyond the grave. But Charles II's revenge has only just begun. Oliver Cromwell's severed head is mounted on a 20-foot spike outside Westminster Hall, the same building where he once wielded absolute power over England. For 24 years, that head remains. Through scorching summers and brutal winters. Through thunderstorms that shake London's foundations and snowstorms that bury the city in white. Cromwell's skull endures it all. A constant reminder of royal justice that never sleeps. Generations of Londoners grow up seeing that head. Children point at it during their first visits to Westminster. Merchants conduct business beneath its gaze. Foreign ambassadors enter England's seat of power under the watchful eye of the man who once ruled this nation. The flesh rots away within months. The hair falls strand by strand. But the skull remains, bleached white by decades of English weather. A monument to royal memory that outlasts human life itself. In 1685, a violent storm finally achieved what 24 years of weather could not. The spike snaps. Cromwell's head crashes to the cobblestones below, retrieved by a quick-thinking guard who recognizes its grisly value. Thus begins the head's strangest chapter. For nearly 3 centuries, it has passed through private hands like a macabre heirloom. Collectors display it in their homes. Scholars examine it for authenticity. Medical students use it for anatomical study. The head that once commanded armies, that planned the execution of a king, that transformed England into a republic, becomes a curiosity. A conversation piece. A relic of power reduced to bone and legend. Finally, in 1960, 300 years after Cromwell's death, Sidney Sussex College, Cambridge, provided the head with its last resting place. A simple burial, unmarked and unremarked. The man who shaped English history for a decade receives a funeral attended by no one. This grotesque spectacle reveals the true face of absolute monarchy stripped of its royal pageantry and divine pretensions. Charles II, merry monarch reputation masks something far more ruthless, a ruler whose concept of justice extends beyond death itself. The message to future generations is unmistakable. Royal power recognizes no limits. Not human dignity. Not Christian mercy. Not even the finality of death. Cross the crown and face consequences that transcend mortal existence. Yet this story has been carefully buried by centuries of royal historians. Court chroniclers preferred tales of Charles's wit, his mistresses, and his restoration of English culture. The posthumous execution of Oliver Cromwell becomes a footnote, sanitized and minimized. Why? Because it reveals something too disturbing about the nature of absolute power. It shows what happens when kings face no accountability, no limits, and no consequences for their actions. It demonstrates that beneath the crowns and ceremony, monarchy can become something monstrous. This isn't the story of a merry king restoring England's glory. This is the story of a traumatized boy who grew up to wield ultimate power with ultimate cruelty. A reminder that absolute authority, unchecked by law or conscience, can justify any atrocity even against the dead. Stories like this prove why independent historical channels matter. The establishment doesn't want you to know how truly sick royal power could be. Help Throne of Lies reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep exposing the brutal truths they tried to bury. Subscribe now, because these stories deserve to be told, no matter how disturbing. The lesson of Oliver Cromwell's posthumous execution echoes through every throne room, every palace, every seat of unchecked power. When authority answers to no one, when revenge becomes policy, when kings treat human beings, living or dead, as objects of their personal vendetta, we witness the true cost of absolute monarchy. And that cost is always paid in human dignity. History remembers Charles II as the merry monarch, the king who brought laughter back to England after Cromwell's grim Puritan rule, the witty sovereign who loved theatre, science, and beautiful women, the charming ruler who restored England's cultural golden age. But now you know what lies beneath that carefully crafted royal image. The 19-year-old boy who watched his father's execution never truly left the throne. Every smile, every jest, every moment of apparent merriment masked the calculated cruelty of a king who turned human corpses into public entertainment. This is the reality of absolute power. Not the fairy tales of noble kings and gallant courts. Not the romanticized versions taught in schools or celebrated in royal pageantry. The truth is always uglier, always more brutal, always more horrifying than the official story. Charles II's posthumous execution of Oliver Cromwell wasn't an aberration. It was an absolute monarchy functioning exactly as designed, without limits, without accountability, without basic human decency. And Charles II wasn't unique among royal monsters. Every throne has its secrets. Every crown hides its atrocities. Every royal bloodline carries stains that official historians have spent centuries trying to wash clean. Next time on Throne of Lies, we expose another royal nightmare that history tried to bury. Because here on Throne of Lies, we don't deal in royal fairy tales. We deal in royal reality. And the truth about power is always more horrifying than the fairy tale.